We're going to hear now from Maria Binetti from Argentina. She is an academic and a specialist in these areas. She's been involved in the WDI work on international institutions, as well as in her own country, Argentina, and written on it at length. And she's going to talk about why the UN and the Inter-American Commission. So thank you so much, Maria, and over to you.
Why UN and why we need a UN working group? And that is the idea to explain. The UN is the main target of our international efforts because it constitutes the global platform and trader of gender identity policies. As a kind of supra-state organization, the head of a global government in human rights affairs. Gender identity is actually a creature of the UN, just as gender was before. The ideological product of American universities, financed by the international corporations, and implemented by the UN on a global scale. The UN promotes, facilitates, and enforces gender identity through its several agencies, reports, experts, advisory opinions, treaty body, decision, etc., etc. This huge mass of papers is called the soft law. And although the soft law is not binding, is usually taken into account by domestic courts and put international pressure on states to take positive actions. In emerging countries like Argentina, UN agencies and programs often exchange monetary and humanitarian assistance for the implementation of these programs and agendas. The UN has set up a real machinery for the production and implementation of gender identity as if it were a human right. To make gender identity into a human right means to dismantle the whole system of human rights, because human rights are for persons, not for self-representations. Doing that, the UN has become the greatest threat to human rights, particularly to women and girls. Human rights. So let's talk about the UN funding. The UN is funded by the member states like US or Japan, the main contributors. However, the wide range of agencies, special programs, forums, missions, etc., are funded separately in a mixed way by countries and by private contributions from companies, NGOs, and private donors. The latest way, the private way of funding the UN has been growing, but often without a transparent and impartial accountability processes. Companies, NGOs, private donors usually have their own agendas and allocate money for specific purposes, in concrete for gender identity recognition and political participation of LGBTQS minorities. Giving money for these specific purposes, these organizations take control and the UN is captured by these private sponsors. Actually, the UN has made several commitments that the consequences of this compromise is independence and impartiality, lead to distorting interpretation and results conditioned by money, produce a language that is not the one agreed by member states, turn the UN into a machinery permeated by political agendas and ideological interests of its sponsors. Thus, we can talk about the sort of privatization of the UN. Take, for example, the case of the independent experts on sexual orientation and gender identity issues, Victor Madrigal Borlos, that Amparo mentioned before. Victor seems to have received generous fees from Arcos Foundation. This is a blog, you can check the information. Victor is very well paid for his reports He has received from Arcus Foundation, well, a lot of money, 100,000 on the one hand and 200,000 on the other hand through Harvard University. Of course, this is conditional money, conditioned to some kind of report. Quite generous has been also the money from, there are many organizations. This page shows some examples. I can show you. For example, Muslims for Progressive Values, or International Fellowship of Reconciliations, or Outright International, ILGA, all these philanthropic corporations give money addressed to the advocacy work on LGBT equality for programs, conferences, experts, advisory opinions. You can see these examples are in this blog. Then the numbers are, for example, 100,000, 206,000 in Outreach International for advocacy work at the UN level. Well, 200,000. These reports and opinions are very well paid. On the other hand, we have the case of the same case, basically the same case, but focus on the Inter-American system. Inter-American systems include the Inter-American Court and Inter-American Commission, also well paid for its reports. There is a careful balanced report, a kind of short book, 30 pages, a short book, reporting the money that the system, Inter-American system, received for this work. The book, yes, here is some example. The book is online. You can find online. I can share the link. Is written by Sebastian Schuft and Maria N. Quiroga, and it explains how the Inter-American human rights system has been captured by the conditional financing from private corporations and NGOs that allocate money for specific purposes. In fact, for gender identity recognition and political participation of LGBT minorities. Under this financial pressure, Inter-American system has created supposed obligations that are not obligations. The court has issued ruling on non-existence, non-compliance, and in the case of strategic litigation cases, usually the same corporations fund the court and the petitioning parties. This is the double standard. This clear conflict of interest is very usual. These companies, these philanthropic companies, pay both sides. Behind the sentences or report of the commission, scholarship, experts, and other projects on gender identity and sexual orientations are, for example, Arcus Foundation, Trust for the Americas, Wellspring, Philanthropic Fund, Open Society Foundations, and countries like Holland or Spain. So in the balance, in this book that I mentioned, you can find a detail of the funding organizations and the projects that are financed year by year by this money. You have numbers such $200,000 for some report on on LGBTQ people, and you have those are the numbers, 100,000, etc., etc. So, in conclusion, the lack of independence, bias, and conflict of interest within the UN have turned it into a major political threat. Today, the UN constitutes a power apparatus captured by the ideological project and interests of its sponsors. Within minimal democratic legitimacy, counter-majoritarian agendas, non-agreed language, and axiological imposition, alien to human rights, especially to women and girls' human rights. That's it. I can share the links of the examples I mentioned.